Most of the Indigenous children were sent off to various mission schools. I was 8 years old when I first entered boarding school, and I was 18 when I came out the other end, really not knowing who I was as a Native person. Most of the boarding schools in Alaska were run by missionaries and, of course, some BIA industrial schools. And it was the law of the land that all Native children were forced to go to these schools. Parents had basically no rights. They could not object. I mean, they could object, but they could also go to prison if they withheld their children. My younger brother and I were at the airport in Fairbanks, were immediately tied together to other children with a rope. There was no way we could anyway try to run away. One of the first things they did after tethering us together with a rope was to write on a yellow name tag that had a metal twisty tie our name, our destination, our flights, that kind of thing. And they affixed those yellow name tags to our shirts and our jackets. My younger brother and I were ushered into a receiving area in the boys' dorm. Immediately, whatever little belongings we had, little suitcases, bags, were confiscated and taken away. I can still remember the first night, and in fact, the first maybe month or two, when lights went out. Many kids in the little boys' dorm would start whimpering. They start sobbing, crying, and our bodies just came from cultures and communities that traditionally ate their traditional foods. And so our bodies were rejecting all of this white man's food. We had vomiting and explosive diarrhea. We couldn't leave the mess hall until that matron saw that we did indeed eat everything off of our metal tray. The real sadness in all of this was somewhere in about October, November, no one cried anymore. If you got within earshot and got caught speaking your language, you got all kinds of things happen to you. You got your mouth washed out with soap, and of course lye soap was the main thing that we were forced to chew on as a way to convince us not to speak our language. We were spanked, we were hit, we had belts used against us, we were put in darkened rooms. There were so much other kinds of abuse. There was psychological abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and of course there was sexual abuse. And it happened in the classrooms, it happened in administrators' offices, it happened in the clinics, it happened on the campus. As kids, we said, it doesn't do us any good to cry. No one's going to come and hold us and hug us and tell us how much they love us, as we had once been told at home. Matrons would often say things like this to us, your mother is evil, your mother is practicing satanic things because she's doing her singing, dancing, and drumming. I would literally walk across the street so as not to be seen in public with my mother. That's how ashamed I was. The sad part about it is over the 10 years that I was in boarding school, I became very estranged to my mom, to a point where I never really went home again. When I met and married Susan and had children, I still had that anger. And I started spending, hours and days and weeks, months and years sitting around tables in the elders in Susan's village, learning a lot of those things about our life as Native people, our values, our things that I should have learned growing up but never did. I do know that from what I've learned from elders is that they would often say things like, talking is healing. And so whenever you can find an opportunity to share your stories, you're going to begin a healing process. But over the years, with those talking circles and healing circles, and just kind of gave me the ability to tell more of the story and more of it and more. And even though I will never forget those experiences, at least I can understand how I felt back in the day, and but how I can also learn how to forgive not only what happened to me, but forgive myself. Many of the elders in the Nana region, for example, said it's okay now to start going back to singing, dancing, and drumming. Our own elders saying that. But it took all those sessions I had with counselors and therapists, and where I really unpacked a lot of this stuff. And it was nice to do that because I was sharing it with other people my age who also experienced trauma as children. And and it was a long process. But whenever I do speak my story or tell my story, I want to do it in such a way as to allow those who are listening to me, give them the courage that maybe they can tell their own story. But I also know that so many of us are hurting, and we're still suffering, and we're still needing to find connection about how can we move on and heal, maybe forgive, uh, not forget maybe, but find those kind of things that gets us to a better place. I can still remember I was either in Imanak or Hooper Bay talking to some elders who shared with me that um, uh, all of the children were forced to leave the village to go to mission school and to BIA schools. And they told me that there was an eerie quiet in the village because there was no children. No children.